My son texted, "Don't come to the wedding, you'll embarrass us." I didn't argue. I just sent him one photo. 10 minutes later, his fiancée called screaming, "The wedding is off!" My son called back, begging, "Mom, please delete that photo." But it was too late. What was in that picture? Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. My phone chimed with the distinctive, polite tone I had assigned to the wedding planner's emails. A flutter of habitual warmth touched my chest before I could stop it. I was at the kitchen counter, the evening light softening the familiar lines of my home, my hands dusted with flour from the pie I would not be bringing to any rehearsal dinner. I wiped my fingers on a towel and reached for the device, a small, expectant smile already forming. It was a reflex, a muscle memory of motherhood, of being included. The screen lit up. There was the planner's update, a subject line about final floral approvals, and beneath it, a separate message. From Marcus. My smile did not fade so much as it solidified, a brittle fixture on my face. I tapped the message. The words appeared, black and stark against the glowing rectangle. "Don't come to the wedding, you'll embarrass us." I read them. Then I read them again. The letters did not rearrange themselves. They did not soften. They remained. "Don't come. You'll embarrass us." The room did not spin in the dramatic way of stories. It simply emptied. The hum of the refrigerator ceased. The distant sound of children playing in the street vanished. The golden hour light streaming through the window over the sink became a flat, painted backdrop. There was only the silence, a profound, ringing silence that was not an absence of sound but a physical presence. It pressed against my eardrums. I became aware of my own breathing, a slow, deliberate in and out that seemed to belong to someone else. I placed the phone face down on the counter. The flour dust made a faint, ghostly print on the dark glass. I looked at my hands, at the silver band I still wore, at the faint tracing of veins that had not been there when those hands held an infant. Embarrass us. The pronoun was a club. It was not just Marcus. It was Marcus and Victoria, a unit, a front, from which I was excluded. I walked into the living room, my steps measured and steady on the hardwood floor. I did not go to the sofa. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by my life. The bookshelves bowed with history texts and novels, the framed photographs on every surface, Marcus as a gap-toothed 7-year-old, Marcus in his graduation robe, my late husband Michael smiling his easy smile, the Afghan my mother had crocheted draped over the armchair. This was the curated museum of a woman's love, and it had just been declared a monument to shame. My reflection stared back from the dark television screen, a poised, older woman with a crown of silver-gray hair. I lifted a hand and touched it. I remembered the first time Marcus had noticed it when he was about 10. He had been sitting on the floor, leaning against my knees as I read to him. He twisted to look up and said, "You have a shiny streak, Mom." He had reached up to touch it, his small fingers gentle. "It's like a crown." I had kissed his forehead, my heart a full, warm vessel. I walked to the large, leather-bound album on the bottom shelf. It was heavy. I carried it to the armchair, the one by the lamp with the warm, yellow light. I sat. The leather was cool and familiar under my palms. I opened it. The first pages were Michael and me, young, absurdly young, our faces smooth with a future we thought we understood. There we were at our own small wedding, in my parents' backyard, my mother's gardenias in my hair, Michael's hand tight in mine. I turned the page. Marcus as a newborn, a tiny scowling bundle. Marcus on his first bike, Michael running behind him. Marcus at 12, tall and lanky, standing between his grandfathers, a look of solemn pride on his face. I turned another page. Here was Marcus at 16, his hair a little longer. He had wanted braids, neat, clean cornrows. I was no expert, but I had learned. I could feel the memory in my fingertips, the pull of the hair, the part of the comb making straight lines on his scalp, his head bowed in trust between my knees as I worked. He had sat for hours on the living room floor, listening to music, patient. When I was done, he had gone to the mirror and grinned. "Look sharp, Mom." He had gone out into the world with a piece of my hands woven into his appearance, and he had been proud. I closed the album. The warmth of the memory was a separate, isolated thing, trapped under glass. It had no pathway to the present. The present was a text message on a cold screen in the other room. I stood and walked back to the kitchen. The light had faded. The room was in twilight. My phone was still there, a dark slab. I picked it up. I pressed the button. The screen illuminated, harsh and blue in the dimness. The message thread was open. My thumb hovered. I did not cry. Crying is a release, a storm that passes. What settled over me was something else, a glacial calm, a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. The hurt was still there, a vast cold lake beneath the ice, but it was contained. It was a fact, like the time or the temperature. He had drawn a line. He had declared my very being a source of embarrassment. He had reduced a lifetime of sacrifice, of stories, of braiding hair and packing lunches and sitting through parent-teacher conferences, to a single, shameful footnote in his new, polished narrative. I looked at the text again. "Don't come to the wedding. You'll embarrass us." A question formed, not as a plea, but as a point of engineering. If I was an embarrassment, what precisely was the source? Was it the silver in my hair, earned through years he had lived? Was it the warmth of my home, filled with the love of people he now chose to forget? Was it the cadence of my speech, the history in my bones, the color of my skin? He thought he had sent a final decree. He thought he had closed a door. He did not understand that he had handed me the key. He had given me the criteria. Embarrassment. All I had to do was define it, and I knew my definitions were older and far stronger than his. The pie crust would wait. I returned to the living room, to the shelf of albums. I bypassed the first one. I reached for a smaller, older one, its cover faded green. I carried it back to the chair. I opened it not to the beginning, but to a place I knew by heart. My fingers found the edge of a specific square photograph, its corners slightly soft from time. I slid it from its transparent sleeve. I held it under the lamplight. The people in it smiled up, frozen in a moment of unassailable truth. I studied it. I had not looked at it with purpose in years. I had simply known it was there, a quiet fact of my history. I picked up my phone again. I opened the camera. I positioned the old photograph on the dark leather of the album cover. I made sure the light was even. I made sure every face, every detail was in crisp, modern focus. I tapped the screen to focus. I took the picture. I went to the message thread from Marcus. I attached the new, clear image of the old, powerful truth. I did not type a word, no caption, no question, no plea. Just the photograph, a silent rectangle waiting to be opened. My finger hovered over the send icon. The room was quiet. The refrigerator hummed back to life. A car passed outside. The ordinary world resumed. I pressed send. The sound the phone made was a soft, digital sigh. A whoosh. The photograph was gone from my screen, launched into the invisible network that connected my quiet living room to whatever sleek, expensive space Marcus currently occupied. I placed the phone back on the leather album, screen down. The action was complete. I sat for a moment in the silence of the sent message. There was no immediate tremor, no cosmic shift. The world absorbed the digital packet of history without a blink. I stood up. I closed the green album and returned it to its precise place on the shelf. I walked back to the kitchen. The flour was still on the counter. The bowl of apple filling, sprinkled with cinnamon and nutmeg, sat waiting. I looked at it. The domesticity of the scene, the expectation of a pie for a gathering that would not happen, felt like a script for a different woman. I picked up the bowl. I carried it to the sink. I emptied the sliced apples into the disposal and turned it on. The grinding sound was loud and final. I washed the bowl, I wiped the counter, I put the flour away, I restored the kitchen to a state of neutral order. My actions were mechanical, a series of tasks to occupy my hands while my mind worked. It was not planning, it was assessment. I had deployed the photograph. It was now a live element in the equation. I considered the variables. Marcus's shame, Victoria's obsession with perception, the brittle social architecture of their world. The photograph was a simple fact. Its power depended entirely on their own values, on the very prejudices Marcus thought he needed to appease. I had not created their weakness. I had merely reminded them of its existence. The phone remained silent on the album in the living room. I did not go to check it. I went upstairs instead. I entered my bedroom, the room I had shared with Michael for 22 years. It was neat, peaceful. I opened my closet. My dress for the wedding hung in a garment bag at the far end. It was a jade green sheath, simple but elegant. I had bought it months ago, imagining the day. I reached past it. I took out my robe and prepared for a shower. The water was hot, steady. I stood under it, letting it run over my shoulders. I thought about the photograph now sitting in Marcus's phone. I knew the moment he would see it. He would be in some carefully curated setting, a restaurant or his apartment. He would feel the buzz in his pocket. He would glance at the notification, see it was from me, and his expression would tighten with a mix of guilt and irritation. He would open it, expecting words, pleading, anger, questions. He would see the image instead. I could picture his face. The initial confusion as his brain processed the old clothing, the familiar yet unfamiliar faces. Then the slow, dawning recognition, the blood draining from his cheeks, the quick, frantic look around to see if anyone was watching him. That was the first consequence, the silent, private earthquake. I turned off the water. I dried myself. I dressed in my nightclothes. As I was brushing my teeth, my landline rang. The sound was jarring, a shrill bell from another era. Few people had that number. My sister, Ruth, my pastor, telemarketers occasionally. I walked to the bedside table and looked at the caller ID. It was Ruth. I picked up the receiver. Eleanor. Her voice was always a statement, not a greeting. Ruth, you're not answering your cell phone. I called twice. It's in the other room, I said. A pause. She knew me. What's wrong? Why does something have to be wrong? Because when you let a phone ring in another room, you're either sleeping, which you never do before 10, or you're staging a quiet protest. Which is it? I almost smiled. Marcus sent a text. About the wedding? Final instructions from the overlord? Her tone was dry. She had never warmed to Victoria, a fact she made no effort to hide. In a manner of speaking, I said. I sat on the edge of the bed. He told me not to come. He said I would embarrass them. The silence on the other end was different from the one in my kitchen. It was a listening, charged silence. I could hear her breathing, then a slow exhale. He wrote those words. Yes. To you. Yes. His mother. Yes. Another pause. I could imagine her face, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes sharpening. Okay, she said finally. The word was calm, deceptively soft. And what did you do? I sent him a photograph. What photograph? The one from the Green album, the one with Joe and Claire. I heard a sharp intake of breath, then a low, appreciative hum. Oh, Ellie, you didn't. I did. Just the photo, no text. No text. She was quiet again, turning it over. He'll know what it is. He will. And she won't. Not at first. No, I agreed. She will not. Ruth let out a sound that was almost a laugh, but without humor. A silent artillery shell. You just rolled it into their fancy party. She was silent for a beat. Are you all right? I considered the question. The cold lake of hurt was still there, but the ice over it was thick, bearing weight. I am functional, I said. Good. Function is underrated. What are you doing now? I was going to read. Do that. Don't wait by the phone. Let them sit with it. Let them marinate. Her voice was firm. Call me if you need to, or don't, but I'll check in tomorrow. Thank you, Ruth. Don't thank me. Just remember who you are. He seems to have forgotten. We hung up. Her words, remember who you are, echoed. I looked at the closed door of my bedroom. Who was I? I was a retired history teacher, a widow, a mother, a keeper of photographs, a woman who made pies she did not get to serve. I was also the woman who had just weaponized a memory. I took my book from the nightstand, a biography of a civil rights journalist I'd been reading, and got into bed. I opened it to the marked page. I read the same paragraph 3 times, the words not forming meaning. My attention was not on the page. It was on the digital phantom I had released into the world. It was traveling, I knew, beyond Marcus. He would show Victoria. She would demand an explanation. The photograph would become a point of contention, a puzzle they would scramble to solve, not understanding it was also the answer. I turned out the light. The room was dark. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling I could not see. I did not wonder if I had done the right thing. The concept of right felt distant, academic. I had done the necessary thing. The only thing that respected the truth of the people in that photograph and the woman they had made me. My cell phone, alone in the dark living room, did not make a sound. The silence was its own form of message. It meant they had seen it. It meant they were reacting. The first phase was complete. Now I waited. Not with anxiety, but with the cold patience of a historian. I had introduced a primary source into a flawed narrative. The collapse of that narrative was now a matter of documentation, not of feeling. I closed my eyes. Sleep would come. Tomorrow would bring the consequences. I woke at my usual time, 6:30, without an alarm. The morning light was pale and diffuse, filtering through the sheer curtains. For a moment, in the space between sleep and full consciousness, the previous evening felt like a bad dream. Then my mind presented the facts in order. The text, the album, the sent photograph. It was not a dream. It was a new condition of my life. I rose and made my bed, smoothing the quilt with practiced hands. I performed my morning routine, washing my face, applying moisturizer, brushing my hair. I looked at my reflection. The poised woman looked back, unchanged. The internal shift did not show on the surface. I dressed in comfortable pants and a soft sweater. I went downstairs. My cell phone was still on the green album where I had left it. I did not pick it up immediately. I went to the kitchen and started the coffee. The ritual of measuring grounds, pouring water, and waiting for the pot to fill was a grounding sequence. The familiar aroma filled the room. I poured a cup and took it to the living room. I sat in my armchair. I placed the coffee on the side table. Then I picked up my phone. The screen showed no missed calls, no new text messages. The last entry in my thread with Marcus was still the photograph I had sent, a small square preview of the past. It had been delivered. It had not been marked as read. This did not mean he had not seen it. It only meant he had not opened it within the messaging application. He could have viewed it from a notification. He could have seen it and chosen not to engage. He could be staring at it right now. I took a sip of coffee. The silence was tactical. He was likely consulting with Victoria. They were deciding on a response or deciding to have none at all. They would be trying to interpret my move. They would see it as a move, a gambit in a conflict. They would not see it as a simple statement of fact. I opened my email. There was the wedding planner's message from last night, the one about floral approvals. I opened it. It was a request for a final decision between 2 centerpiece designs. One was elaborate, with orchids and cascading ivy. The other was more restrained, with white roses and eucalyptus. I had no opinion. I marked the email as unread and closed the application. My landline rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Ruth again. "Good morning," I answered. "You're up," she said. "I've been up for an hour, thinking." Have they erupted yet? No, my phone is quiet. They're regrouping, plotting their counteroffensive. She paused. Did you sleep? Adequately. Good. I want you to go about your day, normally. Do you have book club today? I had forgotten. It was Wednesday. Yes, at noon at Margaret's house. Go. Be seen. Be normal. Don't sit there waiting. It gives them power. I am not waiting, Ruth. I am having coffee. You know what I mean. Act as if the world hasn't shifted. For you, it shouldn't have. You are who you always were. It's their world that's about to tilt. I agreed with her logic. I will go. Call me after. I want a full report. Not on them, on you. We hung up. I finished my coffee. I washed the cup. I went to my study, a small room filled with books and a sturdy oak desk. I had promised a friend I would look over a draft of a local historical society newsletter. I turned on my computer and opened the document. I began to read, correcting grammatical errors and suggesting clearer phrasing. The work required focus. It was a welcome anchor. At 11, I prepared to leave for book club. I chose a simple skirt and a nicer blouse. I put on my silver earrings, small hoops Michael had given me. I looked at my cell phone one more time. The screen was dark. I left it on the kitchen counter. I did not need to carry it. Margaret's house was a 15-minute drive away, in a neighborhood similar to mine. Her living room was full of warm chatter and the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods. The women there were my friends, most of them around my age or older. We had been meeting for a decade. Ellie, we were just talking about the final countdown, Margaret said, handing me a plate with a slice of lemon cake. Your son's wedding is this weekend, isn't it? You must be a bundle of nerves. I accepted the plate. It is this weekend, I said. My voice was even. And you're all set? Dress ready? Asked Carol, another member. My dress is ready, I said. I took a small bite of the cake. It was tart and sweet. The conversation flowed around me, touching on the book, a novel about a family saga, and then diverting to grandchildren, garden problems, and local politics. I participated when asked a direct question. I nodded. I smiled where appropriate. No one detected anything amiss. I was performing normality, and the performance was seamless because a large part of it was still true. This was my life. These women were my community. The other part, the cold, strategic core, was hidden deep, where it did not show. During a lull, while we were refilling our coffee cups in the kitchen, Margaret touched my arm. Is everything all right, Ellie? You seem a little distant. I met her concerned gaze. I'm quite all right, Margaret. Just a bit tired. Last-minute things, you know. It was not a lie. She squeezed my arm. It's a stressful time. It will be beautiful, I'm sure. Thank you, I said. I drove home at 2 o'clock. The afternoon was clear and mild. When I entered my house, the silence was different. It was an active silence. I walked to the kitchen. My cell phone screen was lit up. There were notifications. Not one, but many. Several missed calls. From Marcus. From an unknown number. A string of text messages. The preview of the first one from Marcus showed, Mom, we need to talk about that picture. I did not touch the phone. I took off my coat and hung it in the closet. I poured a glass of water and drank it slowly. The device glowed on the counter, pulsing with their anxiety. The silent artillery shell, as Ruth had called it, had landed. The detonation was now audible. Their panic was a series of digital signals stacked and waiting. I finished the water, I washed the glass, I dried it and put it away. Then, and only then, I picked up the phone. I did not open the messages. I did not listen to the voicemails. I placed the phone back on the counter, screen up. I would let the calls go to voicemail. I would let the texts sit unread. They had sat with my photograph for nearly a full day. Now, I would sit with their reaction. Not out of spite, but out of principle. They had initiated the communication on their terms. I would respond on mine. The control was no longer theirs. It had passed to me the moment I chose which truth to send. The phone began to ring again. The screen lit up, vibrating against the wooden countertop with a persistent, abrasive buzz. It was the unknown number from earlier. I watched it. I counted the rings. 1, 2, 3. On the fourth ring, I picked it up. I did not say hello. I simply held it to my ear and waited. The sound that came through was not a voice, but a chaos of background noise first. The clink of fine glassware, a low murmur of many conversations, the sterile, echoing acoustics of a large, expensive space. Then a strained, hushed voice. "Mom?" It was Marcus. His voice was tight, compressed by panic. "Marcus, where are you?" he asked. The question rushed. "I am at home." "You need to listen. You sent that picture." He was whispering, but the whisper was sharp with urgency. I did. "Why? Why would you do that? Do you have any idea?" He broke off. I heard a rustle, a door closing, and the background noise became muffled, but not gone. He had moved to a quieter space, a hallway perhaps, or a bathroom. "Mom, you have to delete it. Right now. You have to unsend it." "That function does not exist," I said, my voice level. "Once a thing is sent, it is sent." "Then you have to call her. You have to tell her it's a fake, a mistake. Tell her you were upset and you found some random old picture." His words tumbled out in a frantic stream. "Why would I do that, Marcus?" Because she saw it. She looked over my shoulder and she saw it on my phone." His whisper escalated, cracking under the pressure. "She's asking questions. She wants to know who those people are." I said nothing. I let his breathing, ragged and loud in the enclosed space, fill the line. "Mom, please, you're not thinking. This is my life. This is everything I've worked for. Do you want to ruin it? Do you want to ruin me?" The plea had turned into an accusation. "You told me I would embarrass you," I stated, a simple recitation of fact. "I am seeking clarification. How does a photograph from your own family album constitute an embarrassment?" A sound of pure frustration came through the receiver, half groan, half sigh. "You don't get it. You don't live in this world. Tori's family, they're friends. They have certain expectations, a certain image. That picture doesn't fit. It's messy. It's complicated." "I see," I said. "The truth is messy. Therefore, it must be hidden. It's not about truth. It's about what's appropriate for the occasion." His volume was rising despite his obvious attempt to stay quiet. "And a mother is not appropriate." "That's not what I said," he hissed. "It is the logical conclusion of your text." Before he could reply, I heard another voice, distant at first, then coming closer. A woman's voice, sharp and clear even through the phone. "Marcus, what are you doing in here? Our parents are waiting. Who are you talking to?" It was Victoria. Her tone was one of impatience, of someone used to command. "No one. It's nothing," Marcus said, his voice suddenly shifting, becoming smoother, flatter. The change was instant, like a mask snapping into place. "Don't lie to me. Give me the phone." The demand was absolute. There was a brief, muffled struggle, the sound of fabric rustling. Then Victoria's voice came through, closer and colder. "Eleanor? Is that you?" "It is." "What is this? What is this ridiculous picture? Some kind of guilt trip?" Her words were clipped, each one a precise incision. "It is a photograph," I said. "I can see that. What is its point? Marcus is hysterical. You've upset him right before our rehearsal dinner. This is incredibly selfish." I listened. I could hear Marcus in the background, a low, pleading mutter. "Tori, please, just give me the phone." "Be quiet, Marcus." Her attention returned to me. "Explain yourself, now." "The photograph is an heirloom. It belongs to my son. I thought he should have it." "An heirloom." She repeated the word as if it were in a foreign language. "It looks like a cheap, old snapshot of people at some protest. It's political. It's vulgar. And you sent it now, tonight, to stir up drama. I will not have my wedding week polluted with this ancient history." So that was her interpretation. A protest. vulgar. I stored the words. They were more revealing than she knew. The past is not pollution, Victoria. It is foundation. Spare me the homily, she snapped. I am telling you, as the bride, to cease this nonsense. Delete the image from your phone. Instruct Marcus to delete it. And we will consider this a moment of poor judgment on your part, brought on by emotional distress. I am not in distress, I said calmly, and I will not be issuing instructions to delete my family's history. It is his history, too, whether he or you choose to acknowledge it. There was a stunned silence on her end. I imagine no one had refused her so directly, so quietly in a long time. Marcus's whispered, "Oh, God," was audible in the void. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped into a register of pure, icy fury. It was no longer clipped. It was measured, each word a shard of glass. You have no idea what you are doing. You have no idea the damage you are causing. This is a line. You have crossed it. You drew the line, Victoria, I said. I am merely showing you what it looks like. The call ended. The disconnect was abrupt, a sharp click followed by silence. She had hung up. I lowered the phone from my ear. I placed it back on the counter. The quiet of my kitchen was profound. It smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner I had used earlier. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, a bird called. The contrast between the chaos I had just heard and the orderly calm of my surroundings was absolute. I understood the scene now. They were in a restaurant bathroom, the fan humming, surrounded by marble and polished chrome. Marcus, pale and sweating in his expensive suit. Victoria, her perfect composure shattered into a million sharp pieces, her eyes blazing with the outrage of a challenged sovereign. They were trapped in that sterile box, with the photograph glowing between them on a phone screen, a truth they could not delete and could no longer ignore. The first engagement was over. I had not raised my voice. I had not pleaded. I had stated facts. Their reaction, the panic, the insults, the threats, was their confession. They had shown me the exact nature of their embarrassment. It was not about me. It was about the photograph. It was about the story it told, a story they found shameful. I walked to the living room. I looked at the green album on the shelf. I did not take it down. I knew the image by heart. The people in it were smiling. They had faced down a world far more hostile than a country club bathroom. They had not hidden. They had not been ashamed. Marcus and Victoria were now alone with that legacy. Let them sit with it. Let it fill the silent space between them. My work, for the moment, was done. The next move was theirs. And based on the fury in Victoria's final words, I knew it would not be long in coming. The landline rang exactly 10 minutes after the disconnect from the restaurant bathroom. The timing was precise, almost rehearsed. Victoria had spent those 10 minutes, I assumed, formulating her attack, perhaps consulting her parents in hushed, furious tones before securing a private line to deliver the verdict. My cell phone, still on the kitchen counter, remained silent. She was calling the house line, the number listed on the original wedding invitation for the RSVP. It was a pointed choice, formal, official. I was in the living room. I had made a cup of chamomile tea and taken it to my armchair. I had not turned on any lights. The room was lit by the single lamp beside me and the fading blue twilight from the window. I took a slow sip of the hot tea. The phone continued to ring, insistent. I set the cup down on its saucer. The ceramic made a soft click. I stood, walked to the phone table in the hallway, and picked up the receiver on the fourth ring. Eleanor Reynolds. I stated my name as I always did. What came through the earpiece was not a greeting. It was a high-velocity stream of sound, a voice stripped of all polish and stretched thin with rage. "How dare you!" It was Victoria, shrieking. The word dare cracked into a higher register. "How dare you do this to us, to me? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I said nothing. I held the receiver and listened. It was important to let her expend the initial energy. You've ruined everything. Everything. My parents are humiliated. The club manager is on the phone. You've poisoned the entire event with your spiteful little history project. She was almost gasping for breath between phrases. I sent a photograph, I said, my voice low and calm against her shriek. A photograph? You sent a bomb. You sent a deliberate, malicious bomb designed to destroy my wedding. Well, congratulations, you win. Are you happy? The wedding is off. The final declaration was delivered with the force of a door slamming. Off. A single syllable that was meant to be the ultimate weapon. The final word that would reduce me to apologies and pleading. I felt a strange sensation, not triumph. It was colder than that. It was confirmation. The projectile I had launched had found its target with perfect accuracy. The structure they had built, the country club, the floral approvals, the performative unity, was brittle. One undeniable truth had applied pressure, and it had shattered. I am sorry to hear that, I said. The words were automatic, social politeness divorced from feeling. Sorry? You're sorry? You planned this. You wanted this. You couldn't stand that Marcus was building a beautiful life, a proper life, and you had to drag your baggage into the middle of it. Her voice was raw now, scraping. You are a petty, jealous woman, and I will make sure everyone knows it. The wedding is off, do you understand? There will be no wedding. You have destroyed your son's future. I hope you're proud. I looked down the dark hallway toward the living room, where the lamp created a pool of warm light around my empty chair and cooling tea. I thought of the green album on the shelf. I thought of the people in the photograph. They had faced shouting too. They had faced worse. I understand that you have called off the wedding, I said, each word measured. The consequences are yours to manage. There was a choked sound on the other end, as if my calm was a physical obstruction she couldn't breathe around. You unbelievable woman. Don't you call here. Don't you contact Marcus. You are nothing to us. Nothing. Goodbye, Victoria, I said. I did not wait for her to hang up. I placed the receiver gently back into its cradle. The click was soft, definitive. The screaming was gone, replaced by the deep, insulating silence of my home. I walked back to my armchair. I sat. I picked up my teacup. The liquid was still warm. I took another sip. The floral taste was soothing. The wedding is off. The words hung in the quiet air. They were not a tragedy. They were an outcome, a direct causal outcome of a text message sent 4 days prior. Don't come to the wedding. You'll embarrass us. He had been correct. I had embarrassed them, but not in the way he feared. I had embarrassed them by exposing the shame they carried, not by the person I was. The photograph had held up a mirror to their prejudices, and they could not bear the reflection, so they had broken the event rather than face it. A small, sad smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of recognition. The math was correct. The equation had balanced. My own phone, the cell phone in the kitchen, began to ring. The tone was for Marcus. He would be calling now, in the devastating aftermath of Victoria's decree. He would be broken, desperate, looking for a way to rebuild what had just been demolished. He would want to fix it. He would think I could unsay what had been said, unshow what had been shown. I did not move from my chair. I finished my tea. I listened to his ringtone play its full cycle and stop. A moment later, it began again. I let it ring. The first major consequence had landed. The revenge, if one wanted to call it that, was taking effect. It was not violent. It was not loud on my end. It was the sound of a house of cards collapsing under the weight of a single, sturdy fact. I had merely placed the fact on the table. I would wait. I would let the ringing phone exhaust itself. Marcus needed to sit in the ruins for a while. He needed to understand that some structures, once broken, cannot be glued back together with apologies and excuses. Some breaks are fundamental. I placed the empty cup on the saucer. The clock ticked. Outside, night had fully fallen. I sat in the lamplight, a woman in a quiet house, while the world I had gently tilted spun into chaos miles away. The feeling was not power. It was a profound, weary certainty. I had done what needed to be done. Now I would see what happened next. The phone in the kitchen rang for the third consecutive time. The same ringtone, the same pattern. I watched the lamplight reflect on the surface of my empty teacup. I counted to 20. Then I rose, walked to the kitchen, and answered on what would have been the fifth ring. Mother. His voice was a wreck. It wasn't a greeting. It was a wet, broken exhalation. I could hear him struggling to breathe evenly, the sound ragged and gulping, as if he had been running. In the background, there was the hollow echo of a large, empty space. His apartment, likely. He had left the restaurant or been left. Marcus. Mom, please. The word please dissolved into a sob. It was not a performance. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of a man whose carefully constructed world had just vaporized. You have to help me. You have to fix this. Fix what, Marcus? The wedding. Victoria, she called everything off. Her parents. They're furious. They think He was incoherent, sentences crumbling before they were finished. You have to delete the photo. Please, send a text to her right now. Tell her it was a fake. Tell her you were confused. You found it online. It's not our family. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. The desperation in his voice was a physical thing, a clawing need transmitted through the line. I leaned against the kitchen counter, the cool laminate solid under my palm. Why would I do that? I asked. My voice was quiet, almost mild. Because it's the only way, don't you understand? If you just say it's not real, they might reconsider. They're upset about the principle, about the appearance of it. If we say it's a mistake, we can control the damage. He was trying to sound strategic, logical, but it was undercut by the tremor in every syllable. It is not a mistake, I said. It is a photograph of your family. It doesn't matter what it is. He cried out, the frustration breaking through the tears. What matters is what they think it is. And they think it's some kind of political statement, some intentional smear. They think you're trying to make them look bad. I am not responsible for their interpretations, I replied. I sent you a picture from your own history. Their reaction to that history is their own. There was a long pause filled with his shaky breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, crushed. Why did you send it, Mom? Why would you do this to me? I'm your son. That was the question he had been circling since the beginning. He saw the act as an attack on him. He could not see it as a response. You sent me a text, I began, each word deliberate. You said, "Don't come to the wedding, you'll embarrass us." I have replayed that sentence for days. I have examined it from every angle. I have tried to understand what quality of mine, what aspect of my being could possibly cause you such shame that you would exile me from one of the most important days of your life. Mom, I didn't mean... You wrote the words, I interrupted, my tone still even. You chose them. You sent them. Therefore, you must have meant them. So I am asking you clearly and directly, why would I be an embarrassment, Marcus? The silence on his end was different now. It was not the silence of panic, but of a terrible, dawning confrontation. He had not expected the question. He had expected more begging, more negotiating. He had not expected to be asked to justify his own weapon. It's not you, he stammered, defaulting to the evasion. It's the situation. Tori's family, their circle, it's different. They have certain expectations. Expectations that exclude your mother. Expectations that value discretion, a certain uniformity. He was fumbling for the right corporate sanitized terms. Uniformity, I repeated. and I lack that uniformity. It's not about you, he insisted again, a feeble protest. It is entirely about me, and by extension, about your father, about your grandparents, about every person in that photograph you are so desperate to disavow. Your embarrassment is not about my behavior, it is about my existence. It is about our existence. He made a small, choked sound. I continued. You asked why I sent the picture. I sent it as an answer to your text. If I am an embarrassment, then this history, this love, this struggle is the source. If you are ashamed of me, you are ashamed of this. I merely made the connection visible. So you did it to punish me, he whispered, the accusation finally articulated. No, I said, and the word was final. I did it to tell the truth. You made a choice based on a lie, the lie that your past was something to be hidden. I corrected the record. The consequences you are experiencing are the result of your choice, and Victoria's choice, to be embarrassed by the truth, not my choice to tell it. The line was quiet. His crying had stopped. There was only a hollow, stunned silence. I can't talk to you right now, he said, his voice flat and drained. That is your choice, I said. He hung up. The dial tone hummed in my ear. I placed the receiver back in its cradle. The kitchen was exactly as it had been before the call. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the clean counters. The ordinariness of it was a bulwark. I had just dismantled my son's last hope, not with anger, but with simple, inexorable logic. I had held up a mirror to his actions and made him look. I felt no satisfaction. I felt a deep, resonant fatigue. This was the work that needed doing, and it was hard work. It was the work of holding a line that he had tried to erase. I walked to the sink and ran a glass of water. I drank it slowly, looking out the window into the dark backyard. The call had ended, but the conversation was not over. It would continue in his mind in the empty space of his apartment. He would replay my question. Why would I be an embarrassment? He would have to find an answer, and every answer he could conjure would lead him back to the people in the photograph. I finished the water. I rinsed the glass. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs to bed. The structure of the coming days had changed. There would be no wedding weekend. There would be fallout, cancellations, logistics of dissolution. But that was their problem to manage. My role was complete. I had asked the question. Now he had to live with it. The morning after the call with Marcus, I rose with the dawn. Sleep had been a series of shallow pools, broken by the stark clarity of wakefulness. I made coffee, the mechanical actions of firm anchor. As the pot brewed, I went to the living room. I did not turn on a lamp. The gray early light was sufficient. I took the green album from the shelf. I carried it to the kitchen table. I sat. I opened it to the page. I removed the photograph from its sleeve. In the cool morning light, the image was clearer than it had been under the lamp. It was a square photograph with white borders. The colors faded to warm sepia tones. 3 people stood close together on a wide city street surrounded by a crowd that blurred into the background. The focus was sharp on their faces. On the left was a younger version of me. I was perhaps 25. My hair was in an afro, large and proud. I wore a simple denim jacket and a determined, hopeful smile. My arm was linked through the arm of the man next to me. That man was Marcus's father, Michael. He was young, handsome, his face unlined. He wore a corduroy blazer and a tie loosened at the collar. In his free hand, he held the top of a sign. The sign's text was clear in the photograph. Love greater than hate, with a peace symbol drawn beneath the words. Standing in front of us, between our bodies, was a little boy. He was 3, maybe 4 years old. Marcus. His small hand was clasped in Michael's larger one. In his other tiny fist, he clutched a small flag on a stick, a simple drawing of a rainbow on it. He was looking up at the camera, his expression one of solemn curiosity, not fear. We were at the March for Equality and Justice, 1995. It was a peaceful rally in the city, one of many that spring. Michael and I had decided it was important to go, to be part of the collective voice asking for dignity. We had debated bringing Marcus. He was so young. But we believed that the values we wanted to instill, justice, love, courage, were not abstract concepts to be learned later. They were lived experiences, so we brought him. We told him we were going to sing songs with other people who believed in fairness. I remember the day. It was breezy. The sun was bright. There was no violence, only a powerful, hopeful energy. People were chanting, singing. Marcus had been fascinated by the crowd, the banners. A kindly older woman had given him the little rainbow flag. When a photographer from a local newspaper had asked to take our picture, we had agreed. We had stood together, a family representing the future we were marching for. The photograph had run in the paper's Metro section the following week. The caption read, "Young family adds their voice to the call for change." We had clipped it out and saved it. It was a moment of pride, of alignment between our private lives and our public convictions. I traced the edge of the photograph with my finger. This was the image Marcus had called vulgar. This was the political statement Victoria had accused me of weaponizing. It was not a statement. It was a record. It was evidence of who we were, and by extension, who he was. My cell phone rang, breaking the morning quiet. It was Marcus. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello, Marcus." "Mom." His voice was hollow, spent. "I need to understand." "What do you need to understand?" "The picture. You said it was my history. Tell me. Tell me what it is." I looked at the 3 faces in the photograph. The young mother, the young father, the little boy who believed in rainbows. "It is a photograph from the spring of 1995, I began, my voice clinical, like a historian presenting evidence. "You were 3 years and 8 months old. Your father and I took you to a rally in the city, a march for equality and justice. It was a peaceful event. There were speeches, songs. You were given a small rainbow flag by a stranger." I could hear his breathing on the other end, slow and intent. A photographer from the Chronicle asked to take our picture. We agreed. We stood together. Your father held a sign that read, "Love greater than hate." I held his arm. You stood between us, holding your flag. The picture was published in the newspaper. We saved it. I paused, allowing the facts to settle. "You were not embarrassed that day, Marcus. You were curious. You asked questions. We answered them simply. We said we were there with others to remind people to be kind and fair. You understood that as much as a 3-year-old can. You were part of it. That photograph is proof that you were raised by parents who believed in showing up for what is right. It is proof that your earliest lessons were about love being stronger than hate." The silence from his end was profound. I continued. "This is the history you asked me to hide. This is the messy past that did not fit the uniformity of Victoria's world. A memory of your own parents standing for equality, with you between them. That is the source of your shame. Not my behavior, not my appearance. The fact that I am a woman who would go to a march and who would bring her son. The fact that your father was a man who would carry such a sign. The fact that you were that little boy." I don't remember," he whispered. "That is not surprising. You were very young, but the record exists. The photograph exists. And your reaction to it now tells its own story. You are not embarrassed by the photograph, Marcus. You are embarrassed by the values it represents. Because those values, love, equality, justice, are inconvenient to the social climbing you have chosen. They are an obstacle. So you tried to discard them. You tried to discard me as their representative." "It wasn't like that," he said, but the protest was weak, automatic. "It was exactly like that. You saw a path to a certain kind of life. That path required you to minimize or erase anything that signaled a different origin, a different set of priorities. My existence signaled that. This photograph screamed it. So you tried to silence it. You told me not to come. You called this piece of your own life vulgar and political because that was the language of the world you wanted to join. You adopted their dictionary. I stopped speaking. I let the truth sit between us, long distance, as tangible as the photograph in my hand. After a long time, he spoke, his voice ragged. "What do I do now?" "That," I said, "is a question only you can answer. You have seen the evidence of who you come from. You must decide what you do with that knowledge. You can continue to be ashamed of it. You can try to explain it away to Victoria and her family as a youthful indiscretion of your parents. Or you can look at that little boy you were and ask yourself what he would think of the man you have become." I did not wait for a response. "I have nothing more to say on the matter, Marcus. The photograph is yours. The history is yours. The decision is yours." I ended the call. I placed the photograph back into its sleeve and the album back on the shelf. The story was now fully told. The truth had been deployed, explained, and left to do its work. There was no delete button for it. There was only the choice of how to live with it. My part was complete. The silence after explaining the photograph was a deep, still pool. I did not disturb it. I moved through the next day and the day after that with the same methodical rhythm as before. I watered my plants. I went to the grocery store. I attended my volunteer shift at the library, sorting donated books. The world continued to turn. The space where the wedding had been was now an absence, a canceled event on a calendar. I did not fill it with anything. I let it be empty. Ruth called on the second day. Her voice crackled with vindicated energy. "You have caused a seismic event in the land of the Kensingtons," she said without preamble. "It's all over their social set. My friend Maureen, you remember her? Her daughter runs with that crowd? She called me." "What did she say?" I asked, placing a bag of groceries on the counter. "That the wedding is not just off. It is obliterated. The Kensingtons have pulled their funding entirely. They called the country club and canceled everything themselves, told the manager it was due to unforeseen, irreconcilable differences. Very dignified language for a total meltdown." I began putting cans of soup in the pantry. "I see. That's not all. The photograph. It's out." Victoria, in her fury, forwarded it to a few of her friends, trying to get ahead of the story, I suppose, to paint you as a radical. It backfired spectacularly. How so? Because, Ellie, the picture isn't of a riot. It's not angry. It's a beautiful picture of a young family, a black woman, a white man, and a beautiful little biracial boy holding a rainbow flag at a peace march. It's practically a Norman Rockwell painting for liberals. Some of her so-called friends thought it was sweet. They asked why she was so upset. Others, the ones with more traditional views, were appalled, but not at you, at her family. The conversation shifted from his crazy mother to, why are the Kensingtons so threatened by a picture of love? Maureen said the group chat is a war zone. Alliances are shifting. It's a beautiful mess. I listened, placing a box of tea bags on the shelf. The fallout was following a predictable sociological pattern. When you weaponize someone else's bias, you cannot control where the shrapnel lands. "And Marcus?" I asked. Her tone sobered. "Maureen's daughter said he's been cut loose. Victoria is done. Her parents have apparently forbidden her from seeing him. He's persona non grata in that entire circle. The firm he works at is full of Kensington connections. Maureen hinted his position there might be untenable. He built his house on their land, and they've evicted him." I closed the pantry door. The information was clinical data, cause and effect. "He made his choice," I said, my voice quiet. "He did," Ruth agreed. "And now he's living with the architecture of that choice. It's a hollow building, I hear." We talked a few minutes more about mundane things before hanging up. The news was not a surprise. It was the logical conclusion of the sequence I had initiated. The photograph had acted as a litmus test, revealing the true colors of that world. Marcus had tried to be colorless, to blend in. The photo had reminded everyone forcefully of where his color came from. Later that evening, my landline rang again. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. He did not leave a message. An hour later, it rang again. Again, no message. He was calling into the silence, perhaps hoping for a reversal, for a miracle. There was none to give. I thought of him in his downtown apartment, the sleek, impersonal space he had been so proud of. It would feel different now, not like a trophy, but like a waiting room. The silence there would not be peaceful. It would be the silence of abandoned plans, of ringing phones not answered, of a future that had been canceled. Victoria's world, with its rules about uniformity and discretion, had ejected him for failing to properly hide his non-conformity. My world, the world of the photograph, had never asked him to hide. It had only asked him to remember. He had failed that too. So he was suspended between two worlds belonging to neither. I felt no pleasure in his isolation. I felt a grave, solemn understanding. This was the cost. This was the price of the ticket he had tried to buy with my dignity. The transaction had been voided, and the currency had been returned to him, worthless. I sat in my armchair and picked up my book. I read a chapter. The words held my attention. My home was quiet, but it was a quiet full of presence. The presence of my books, my photographs, my memories. It was not hollow. The revenge, as people might call it, was complete. It was not an act of violence. It was an act of exposure. I had exposed his shame, and in doing so, exposed the rotten foundation of the world he coveted. Both had crumbled under the light. He was left in the rubble. My house, built on older, sterner ground, remained standing. I turned a page. The story I was reading was about resilience. I found I could focus on it perfectly. The turmoil across town was no longer my concern. I had stated my case. The jury of their own prejudices had delivered the verdict. The sentence was being served. My role was now that of a witness, not a participant. I closed the book for the night, turned off the lamp, and sat in the comforting dark. The cycle was complete. A week passed. The day that would have been the wedding was a Saturday like any other. I woke, I had my coffee, and I decided to work in the garden. The autumn air was crisp, and the late-blooming asters needed deadheading. I put on my old gardening gloves and knelt on the cushion by the flower bed. The physical work of snipping and clearing was a good occupation for the hands and the mind. The doorbell rang in the mid-afternoon. I was not expecting anyone. Ruth had said she might stop by, but she would have called first. I pulled off my gloves, set them on the porch step, and walked to the front door. I did not look through the peephole. I simply opened the door. Marcus stood on the welcome mat. He looked like a different man, not just tired, but eroded. The expensive, sharp-cut look was gone. He wore wrinkled khakis and a plain gray sweatshirt. His hair, usually meticulously groomed, was unstyled and a little too long. He had not shaved. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a new gauntness hollowed his cheeks. He carried no bag, no offering, just himself. We stood there, separated by the threshold. He did not try to force a smile. His eyes met mine, and I saw no anger there, no blame. Just a deep, weary emptiness and a question. "Mom," he said. His voice was rough, unused. "Marcus." "Can I come in?" He asked it flatly, without presumption. I considered. This was my territory, my ground. Letting him across the threshold was a decision. I looked past him for a moment at the quiet street, the familiar maple tree on the curb. Then I stepped back. "Yes." He entered, wiping his feet carefully on the mat. He stood awkwardly in the hallway, as if he had forgotten the layout of the house he grew up in. The living room was to his left, the kitchen straight ahead. "Would you like some water?" I asked, moving toward the kitchen. "Yes, please." He followed me, but stopped at the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame as if he needed the support. I took a glass from the cupboard, filled it with filtered water from the pitcher in the fridge, and handed it to him. He took it and drank the entire contents in several long swallows. He placed the empty glass on the counter. "Thank you," he said. I nodded. I did not ask why he was here. I waited. He looked around the kitchen, his gaze lingering on the small things, the ceramic fruit bowl on the table, the magnet holding a shopping list on the fridge, the worn spot on the flooring near the sink. These were the artifacts of a life he had rejected as insufficient. "I lost my job," he said abruptly, stating it to the room more than to me. "Yesterday. They said it was a restructuring. It wasn't. The senior partner is a golf buddy of Victoria's father." "I am sorry to hear that," I said, and it was true. I was sorry for the pain, even if I understood its origin. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "It's what happens. You get what you pay for. I was paying with everything else." He finally looked directly at me. "I've been sitting in my apartment for a week, thinking. I don't have anything left to think about except that picture. What you said about it." I remained silent, letting him find the words. "I don't remember that day," he said. "Not a single detail, but I've been staring at the photo on my phone. I look at that little kid. He doesn't look scared. He looks serious, like he's trying to understand something important." He paused, swallowing hard. "I don't know who that kid is anymore." "He is you," I said quietly. "I know." The words were a confession. That's the problem. I know it's me, and I have spent the last 5 years trying to be someone he wouldn't recognize, someone he might even be afraid of. The admission hung in the air. It was not an apology. It was a diagnosis. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked. He took a deep, shaky breath. "I don't have the right to ask for anything. I know that, but I was wondering." He hesitated, his eyes dropping to the floor, then forcing themselves back up to meet mine. "Could you tell me about them again? Tell me about the march. Tell me about you and Dad, what you believed, why you thought it was so important to bring me." And he wasn't asking for reconciliation. He was asking for information, for history. He was, in the most basic way, trying to go back to the source. I looked at him, this man-boy broken on the rocks of his own choices. The icy lake of my hurt was still there, but the surface was calm. He was not demanding. He was requesting. He was, for the first time in a long time, showing a willingness to learn. "It will take a while," I said. "I have time," he replied. A flicker of bitter irony touched his mouth. "I have nothing but time." I moved past him into the living room. I went to the bookshelf. I did not pull out the green album this time. Instead, I took down a different, older book, a bound collection of local newspaper clippings and flyers from the era. I carried it to the sofa. I sat. I looked at him, still standing in the kitchen doorway. "If you want to know, you have to listen." He nodded. He walked into the living room and sat in the armchair opposite me, the one Michael used to favor. He sat on the edge, his posture stiff, his hands clasped between his knees. He looked like a student in a difficult tutorial. I opened the book. I found a clipping of an article about the march. I began to read parts of it aloud, then stopped and explained the context. I told him about the political climate of that year. I told him about our conversations at the dinner table, the books we were reading, the sense of obligation we felt not just to complain, but to participate. I spoke of his father's quiet conviction, of my own fiercer hope. I described the bus ride downtown, the feel of his small, trusting hand in mine, the way he had pointed at the banners and asked what they said. I did not sentimentalize. I presented it as fact. This is what we did. This is why we did it. This is what we wanted you to know. He listened. He did not interrupt. He just listened, his eyes fixed on me, or sometimes on the yellowed newsprint. His expression was one of intense, painful concentration. When I finished, the room was quiet. The afternoon light had shifted, growing longer and softer. He did not speak for a full minute. Then he said, "Thank you." I closed the book. That is a starting point. There is more, much more. "I'd like to hear it," he said, his voice thick. "Sometime, if you're willing." I looked at him, sitting in his father's chair, a lost man seeking a map to a place he had left. The door to my home was open. The book of our history was on the coffee table. "The starting point is here," I said. "Where you go from it is up to you." He nodded, understanding it was not an absolution but an opportunity, a chance, perhaps, to rebuild from the original foundation instead of the faulty one he had chosen. He stood up. I should go. I stood as well. I walked him to the front door. He stepped out onto the porch, then turned. I'll call before I come by next time," he said, an echo of old manners resurfacing. "That would be considerate," I agreed. He gave one more slow, searching look at the house, at me, then turned and walked down the path to his car. A rental, I noticed. His own sleek vehicle was probably another casualty. I closed the door. I did not lock it. The visit was over. The first tentative thread of a possible understanding had been spun. It was fragile. It might snap, but it existed. For now, that was enough. I returned to the living room, then to the book on the table, to the quiet of my own, unwavering truth. The house did not stay quiet for long after Marcus's visit. The following Saturday, the day that had been meticulously circled on the calendar for a country club wedding, I did not stay alone with my thoughts. I called Ruth. I called Margaret from book club. I called a few other friends. I did not frame it as a consolation gathering or a counter-celebration. I simply said I was having people over for an early supper, and I would be glad if they could come. By 4 p.m, my home was full, not with the tense, perfumed silence of a rejected event, but with the robust, overlapping noise of community. The scent of rosemary and garlic from the 2 large pans of baked chicken in the oven mingled with the sharper aroma of the vinegar-based potato salad I had made that morning. A pot of greens simmered on the stove. The table was extended with the extra leaf, covered with a bright cloth, and set with my everyday dishes. Ruth arrived first, carrying a coconut cake still warm from her oven. She hugged me, a firm, quick squeeze. "The house smells like a proper home," she said, her eyes scanning my face. She saw the calm there and nodded once, satisfied. Margaret came with her husband Ben, who immediately offered to help with drinks. Carol from book club brought a basket of rolls. Other friends arrived, some from my teaching days, others from the neighborhood. They brought side dishes and bottles of wine and their easy, familiar laughter. The living room furniture was pushed back a little to make space. Jazz played softly from the small speaker in the corner, not background music for canapes, but the soulful, rhythmic kind you feel in your bones. I moved through the rooms, greeting people, refilling bowls, accepting compliments on the food with a quiet thank you. No one mentioned a wedding. No one offered awkward condolences. They spoke of their grandchildren, a recent movie, the city's plans for a new park. They asked after my garden. They treated me as I always was, Eleanor, their friend. Not a victim of a tragedy, but a woman hosting a dinner. At one point, I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, a dish towel in my hand, and just listened. The sound was a tapestry of conversation, the clink of forks on plates, a burst of genuine laughter from Ruth telling a story. The light from the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air, illuminating the faces of the people who had chosen to be here, in this house, with me. This was the antithesis of the cold, silent rejection that had begun this journey. This was the answer. It was not a shouted rebuttal, it was a lived one. Ruth sidled up next to me, holding a glass of iced tea. "You did good, Ellie." "I did nothing but cook chicken and make a phone call," I said. "You know what I mean. You didn't let it break you. You built this instead." She gestured with her glass at the full room. This is your country club, and the membership dues are a hell of a lot more honest. I allowed a small smile. The dress code is certainly more comfortable. She chuckled and moved back into the fray. Later, as people settled with dessert and coffee, someone asked Ben to play something on the old piano we had against the far wall. He was a retired music teacher. He sat, flexed his fingers, and began to play. It wasn't a wedding march. It was an old bluesy standard. A few people began to sing along softly, others tapping their feet. I sat in my armchair, the one I had sat in the night I received the text. I watched my friends, my chosen family. I felt the solidity of the floor beneath my feet, the warmth of the room, the strength of the history in these walls that had witnessed love and loss, and now this resilient joy. My hand went to my hair, to the silver strands at my temple. I thought of Marcus's childhood words, "It's like a crown." He had been right then. It was a crown, not one of royalty, but of endurance, of time lived, lessons learned, dignity maintained. It was the story of my life, written in a color I had earned. The phone did not ring. No desperate calls, no screaming messages. The world I had gently tilted had righted itself into a new, more honest configuration. Marcus was somewhere, grappling with his. I was here, sure in mine. As the evening wound down and people began to gather coats, thanking me and promising to return the favor soon, I felt a profound peace. It was not the peace of forgetting or of total forgiveness. It was the peace of resolution. The conflict had been engaged, the truth had been told, and I had emerged, not unscathed, but intact. More than intact. I was rooted. After the last guest had left and Ruth had helped me with the final load of dishes, she kissed my cheek at the door. "You're going to be all right, sister." "I know," I said, and I did. I locked the door. I turned off the lights, leaving only the lamp by my chair on. The house was quiet again, but it was a different quiet. It was a quiet full of echoes of laughter, of the imprint of community, of the satisfied fatigue of a host. It was my quiet. I sat in the chair for a while, in the pool of lamplight. I looked at the photographs on the shelves, the faces of my past smiling back. I looked at the empty space on the coffee table where the green album usually sat. The story it contained was no longer a silent, hidden thing. It had been spoken. It was now part of the air in this room, part of the foundation. The revenge was complete. But that word felt too small for what had transpired. It had not been about harming Marcus. It had been about reclaiming a narrative. It had been about refusing to be defined by someone else's shame. In doing so, I had not destroyed my son. I had offered him, at great cost, a chance to see himself clearly. Whether he took it was his journey. Mine was here. I touched my silver hair once more, a conscious, affirming gesture, my crown, my story. I turned off the lamp and went upstairs in the dark, guided by memory and the solid certainty of every step on the familiar stairs. I was whole. With or without his understanding, I was and would always be whole.